Born in 1984 and raised in the church, I had a strong Baptist upbringing with a heavy focus on not just knowing biblical principles, but on living them also. My falling away from the church into New Age, then back to Jesus, is certainly a strange story. It began with an unwanted spiritual encounters when I was a child. I don't really remember too much from my childhood prior to the age of 12, but the little I do remember about being a child in the 80s, including being afraid, especially at night, things like that. On the surface, that might seem typical. I mean, most children at one time or another are afraid of the dark or of monsters in their closet, but for me, it wasn't the dark I was afraid of. It was disembodied whispers that I feared, and my monster wasn't in the closet, but it was actually in the backyard. My mother had to fill in the blanks for me when I became an adult because much of this I had long ago forgotten. My mom said that when I was a young child, I was afraid of voices in my room and of an indescribable monster in my backyard. She was never able to get more information from me, but at the time, she believed, as I imagine most mothers would, that I was experiencing nothing more than a combination of bad dreams and an overactive imagination. But one morning, the monster made itself known to my family and neighbors. This is one incident my mom did not have to recall for me. I vividly remember waking up and hearing my mom, dad, and a couple of neighbors talking in the backyard. Upon opening the back door and heading outside to see what they were talking about, I saw a really strange sight. All of the grass in our backyard was completely flattened, as smooth as a tight sheet on a freshly made bed. My family and neighbors, clearly shocked at this discovery, were discussing what could have done something like that. This was an occurrence that no one had ever seen before, and our half-acre backyard was the only place in the neighborhood where it had happened. No one had witnessed the cause. The adults assumed it happened the night before while everyone was sleeping. After some discussion, they decided the most natural explanation was that a herd of deer had come into our backyard, laid down in such a way as to perfectly flatten every blade of grass, then left without leaving any tracks, without being seen and without being hit by any of the cars that might have been driving at the time. We lived in Flint, Michigan at the time, and while deer were not uncommon, a herd big enough to fill every inch of our backyard and behaving that way would have been unimaginable. But without a better explanation, my family and neighbors left it at that, and as far as I know, the incident was never discussed again. After I had turned 12, my mom and I moved out of the house in Flint and moved to Holly, Michigan with my stepdad. From then and on into adulthood, I suffered from frequent sleep paralysis, about 3 times a month. For those not familiar with that term, sleep paralysis is a condition in which a person tries to fall asleep, but instead of doing that, finds himself fully awake, yet unable to move. And this is commonly a horrific experience involving auditory and visual hallucinations, according to medical professionals. Personally, I don't know how much of these experiences are hallucinations and how many of them are real spiritual encounters. When I would tell my mom about what I was going through at night, she would say they were only dreams and nothing to worry about. I found out years later that she actually had been having similar experiences but didn't want to tell me about them at the time. She was worried that it would only scare me more and she didn't know what to do about it anyway. Though, like my mom was raised as a Baptist, Christian, but neither she nor I were well versed in subjects of demonic entities and spiritual warfare. The problem I had believing these experiences were just dreams or hallucinations was that the physical environment was sometimes altered. So, for example, one time I saw a shadowy, hooded figure open my bedroom door. I always slept with my door closed, and attempted to initiate an attack on me. Not knowing what else to do, I instinctively cried out to Jesus in my mind, and the hooded figure left my room. The next morning, though, my door was still open. Now, some might say that I probably opened the door while sleepwalking or that someone else in the house had opened it for some reason. Now, that's certainly within the realm of possibility, but I had never sleptwalked before. Furthermore, I asked my mom and stepdad if they had opened my door, and they said they hadn't. There are absolutely many possible natural explanations, but I can only detail what happened and how I felt about it, though admittedly, my feelings are subjective by nature, of course. Now, while the experience was occurring, I had no doubt in my mind that the hooded figure was pure evil and was actually really there. When I turned 18, I moved out and spent some time living in one place and then another with various friends. But the sleep paralysis never stopped. It even got to the point that I felt obligated to tell people before moving in with them about my sleep paralysis problem. Only one time were further questions asked and a possible solution was presented. Now, this conversation was what hurled me into the New Age movement. I was invited to stay at an engaged couple's apartment for a while until I could save enough money to live on my own. For sake of this, and to protect our privacy, I'm just going to refer to them as Rachel and Bob. Now, I had known Rachel from high school and had become friends with Bob while working with him at a fast food restaurant. Shortly after I moved in, I told Rachel about my sleep paralysis. She was incredibly interested, which was a first to me. She quizzed me with many questions and ended up asking if I thought there was anything spiritual behind what was going on. I told her I believed the occurrences were demonic, but due to my lack of knowledge on the subject, despite being raised in the church, I wasn't really able to articulate anything further than that. At this point, Rachel expressed she believed it was probably demonic too. And before this, I had not known if she believed in anything spiritual at all, let alone in actual demons. She asked if I ever heard of something called astral projection. I had not. She explained that some people believe that through training in meditation, a person can train his or her consciousness to leave the physical body and enter what's called the astral plane. She told me the astral plane looks just like our physical reality, and in fact is our reality. It's just the part that we cannot see or experience while we are in our physical bodies. She suggested that if I could learn this skill, maybe I could escape or defend myself when demons attacked again. She then gave me a book that detailed exactly how to astral project. Before this, no one had taken me seriously when I tried to talk about my strange experiences. Most times, people would say it was all in my head, or dreams or hallucinations. A couple people even went as far as to suggest that I might have been schizophrenic. I wasn't, and am not. But because of those responses, I had finally stopped talking about the possible spiritual aspects of my sleep paralysis. But there, for the first time, a friend was taking me seriously, believing me, and offering a solution. Not even my own family or church had done that. Therefore, it was incredibly easy for me to fall into the New Age deception that I was being presented with. Now, to be clear, I don't believe that Rachel was trying to deceive me in any way. In fact, I fully believe she was deceived herself. She was only trying to help a friend, but unfortunately, the help she was offering would only make my spiritual problems far worse than I could ever have imagined. The book Rachel gave me was my introduction to New Age theology. I studied that book in far more depth than any book I had read before, including the Bible, and I followed every instruction it contained. I participated in daily breathing exercises and meditation practices, and I even became a vegetarian because the book said doing so would help me be able to astral project. 6 months and a complete worldview change later, I had my first breakthrough into the astral plane. Now, what I'm going to explain here, I have no way of proving. I have no doubt it was real, but I also have zero evidence to support or prove that to anyone. And that's one of the maddening aspects of New Age. The possession of a supernatural ability without any way of proving it to anyone else. Now, since I came out of New Age and into Christianity, realizing the real truth of Jesus Christ, the fact that I can't prove my New Age experience doesn't bother me at all anymore. In fact, I would be totally at peace even if it was proved someday that I had really just imagined or hallucinated all of my astral projection experiences. What I see now but couldn't see then is that New Age is nothing more than spiritual bondage. The truth sets you free, and Jesus is the truth, way, and life. Well, the first time I experienced something like leaving my body started like any ordinary night. I was living with a different group of friends at this time. I had gone upstairs to my bedroom where I was doing my meditation practices. While going through the process of trying to leave my body, I felt myself become lighter as I began to rise through the air. I opened my eyes and realized I was standing upright but was hovering about a foot off the ground. Now, though I did not turn back to see my physical body, I had the feeling that I was outside of it. I began to uncontrollably float down through the floor and walls into the first floor living room where two of my friends were talking. And I recognized that their conversation was too quiet and too far away from my room for me to be able to hear with my physical ears from the other side of the house. That realization was so shocking to me that I instantly found myself back in my physical body. The next day, having remembered a piece of the conversation my friends were having, I wanted to investigate whether it had been real. It had felt completely real to me, but I wanted confirmation. I asked my friends if they had been up talking the night before, and if so, what were they talking about? I was careful not to ask any leading questions. I wanted to hear it directly from them and them alone. After a few moments, they told me the part of the conversation I had heard the night before while I had been outside my body. I didn't tell them why I was asking, and I didn't tell them about my experience, but this convinced me that the New Age was a movement worth pursuing. Now, fast forward a few years, and I was still practicing astral projection. I had had many experiences before that. At this time, I was living with my wife and our first newborn daughter. We lived in a tiny single-wide trailer with a roommate, a friend of ours from work. I'll just refer to her as Amy. Amy claimed to be an atheist, yet she had an interest in Wiccanism and also denied the existence of anything spiritual. She didn't know about my New Age practices, but one day I was alone in the trailer and decided to meditate. This led to astral projection, and I found myself outside facing the street. This was the first time I had ever seen any other entity on the astral plane, and the environment around me was full of them. To my left, in the distance, I saw a large, bright opening in the middle of the street. It looked like someone had sliced and pulled apart reality itself, and there was nothing but light on the other side. Innumerable entities, all of different sizes and shapes, as far as I could see, were heading towards this light. Some were walking, some were floating, some were in groups, some were alone, some were in the street, some were on the rooftops of the neighboring trailers. These beings were everywhere. I decided to talk to the members of a group that was nearest to me, about 30 feet away. This group consisted of about 5 or 6 beings. Some looked human and others looked monstrous, although I had no fear. As I approached, it felt as normal as if I were in a supermarket and I went up to a group of shoppers to ask if they know where the oranges were located. I asked what they were doing and what that glowing opening was, but instead of answering my questions, they became extremely interested in me. In a very friendly and non-threatening way, they asked questions of their own. One of the human-looking entities wanted the group to continue and ignore me, but the rest did not comply. The other members asked me if I came from their world. I told them no, that I was from the physical world and was astral projecting outside of my body. They actually seemed really pleased with that answer. One of the entities then kindly and gently told me that if I ever wanted help leaving my body, I could ask them to help and they would. Now, even though the demeanor of the entities seemed pleasant, something about that encounter did not sit well with me. I thanked them and said I had to go back home, and they said goodbye, and I found myself back in my body again. Well, a couple of days later, I tried to astral project again, but was unsuccessful. I felt like something external was blocking my attempts. I remembered the group's offer to help, but I still felt uncomfortable about that. I was tempted, but ultimately it felt too much like praying to something that wasn't God. I decided not to ask the astral beings for help and not to even astral project that day. That was when, literally, all hell broke loose. Not long after that, everyone living in our trailer began experiencing horrifying manifestations of things otherworldly. We all began having sleep paralysis every night. My daughter, who was a little over a year old at the time, was having night terrors constantly. Even our atheist roommate, Amy, who didn't know anything that I was doing, began telling me that she was seeing glowing orbs shoot into the bedroom I shared with Christina. Christina and I would have sleep paralysis at the same time, and we would even see the same entities, only these were not peaceful and benevolent. They were gnarled, twisted, dark, hate-filled, and evil, yet somehow I knew they were the same beings I had met before. They began manifesting even during the day as black shadow creatures or as angry whispering voices outside in the yard. We would all hear loud explosion-like crashes in the bathroom at night, only to find nothing unusual or out of place when we investigated. The disturbances drove us to the point that we all began sleeping in the living room floor at night for fear of being alone. At this time, I explained to Amy and Christina what I believed was happening. I had inadvertently infuriated and offended those beings when I had not accepted their offer to help, and now they were demanding attention and seeking revenge. We were now seeing their true forms. They were not benevolent astral beings. They were malevolent demons. Out of pure desperation and hopelessness, I did something I had not done honestly or genuinely in years before that point. I called out and begged Jesus for help. I didn't know what else to do. My family was being terrorized by an enemy I could not see, understand, or defend ourselves against. I couldn't tell anyone about what was going on because, of course, the entire story sounded completely crazy. I had no options left, and I realized I was responsible for this turn of events. I had invited these things into my life. They might have been following me since I was a child, but this was the first time I had actively sought them out. Only I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know whom I was seeking. I didn't know that the so-called angels that I wished to talk to were, in fact, the same evil spirits terrorizing me since childhood. Most frightening, now that I had invited them in by looking for them in the first place, I didn't know how to make them leave. So, out of desperation, I called out to the only one I thought might be able to help, Jesus Christ. No more than a day or two after that prayer, I received an answer. I turned on the television and was flipping through the channels when I came across a program that featured a guest who was talking about aliens and the mark of the beast from the biblical book of Revelation. Now, I had a long time interest in aliens, and since I was a child, I had wondered how, if at all, they might fit into the Bible. As a child, I had always been told, aliens aren't real, they're demonic, but never seen a Bible verse to support that. I was expected to believe it without having any biblical support whatsoever. I had long since believed the Bible just did not contain any answers about aliens. However, the person talking on the program was providing answers to my questions straight from the Bible itself. I recorded the program on my DVR and continued to listen to the guest's testimony, which included a past in New Age, conversion to Christianity, and learning skills in spiritual warfare. At the end of the show, the host gave out the name and web address of the guest, L.A. Marzulli. I wrote down this information and waited for my wife to come home. I told her she must watch the show, so we watched it together. She was just as amazed as what she was learning as I had been. We never heard terms like spiritual warfare or Nephilim before, nor had we heard about the connection between the 6th chapter of Genesis, where it talks about giants, and the modern UFO and alien abduction phenomenon. I felt this information would lead us to finding the ultimate answer to our spiritual problem. After that, I decided to rededicate my life to Jesus. I went through the salvation prayer, telling Jesus I believe he exists, I believe he died on the cross for my sins, rose on the 3rd day, I accept his gift of salvation and believe, he rose from the dead to show that he conquered death, and if I believe and follow him, I can be in eternity with him as well after I die. I had done this as a very young child, but this was the first time I offered this prayer while understanding exactly what I was doing and accepting what it all meant. I repented of my sins and completely renounced New Age theology. I vowed to never astral project again. I threw out all of my books, CDs, and other New Age literature. Christina and I had been doing Bible studies together. We began doing that. And watching more Christian TV programs, including more interviews and presentations from L.A. Marzulli, which led us to other researchers such as Tom Horn, Gary Stearman, and others. But Christina and I were still dealing with the demonic manifestation problem in our trailer. I decided to take a chance and reach out to L.A. Marzulli, so I sent him an email through his website describing our problems and asking for his advice on how to make it stop. L.A.'s wife, Peggy, responded to my email with her husband's phone number, telling me that she would like me to call him. When I did so the next day, he personally gave me a crash course in spiritual warfare. From that call, I learned about using the authority of the name of Jesus to cast out demonic entities, but also to close any spiritual portals I may have opened. Since I had now dedicated myself to Jesus, these demonic beings had no legal hold over me, so all I had to do was command them to leave in Jesus' name. L.A. explained that evil spirits had been defeated at the cross. He gave me some Bible verses and prayed with me, and we concluded the call. That day, I went through every room of the trailer, commanding any and all evil spirits to leave and every demonic portal to be closed in the name of Jesus. After that, there was peace in the trailer. The manifestations, the constant sleep paralysis, whispers, noises, all of it stopped. Even more, a spiritual peace was within me that I had never known before. That is why understanding the lies of New Age and the truth in Jesus is so important. The true power is in Jesus. New Age is just pure deception. Unfortunately, many practicing New Age, most in fact, perhaps all, do not realize how deceptive New Age actually is. There was a time I would have defended it tooth and nail, but not anymore after having my eyes opened by Jesus. My experience is not unique. If you are in the New Age, just because it hasn't happened to you yet doesn't mean it won't. The enemy is smart. The entities will bide their time and come across as the most loving, peaceful, and benevolent beings you could ever imagine. Eventually, though, they will tip their hand. Maybe it'll be when they ask you to do something and you don't do it. Maybe they will offer you a favor and you don't take it. Maybe they never ask anything of you but simply decide to turn on you one day. Maybe they'll keep deceiving you until the day of your death, when it'll be too late. At that time, your choice in eternity will be sealed. Learn from my mistakes so you don't have to learn from your own. You owe it to yourself to at least hear what Jesus, through his word, has to say about the modern New Age movement. It might seem surprising, but he has extremely strong feelings about it. I hope my testimony can help someone out there dealing with the same New Age deception I was caught in. I highly encourage anyone watching to give your life to Jesus and see what the truth really is.